Welcome to the Protecting Your Nest podcast. Have you ever thought what it would be like to live forever or just to live as long as possible, giving you more time to live your life purpose? Thankfully, advances in science and medicine are giving us more opportunities to do just that, but don't think that it's all about just medicine. Today's guest has a different perspective which I feel will really help us think about longevity in a different way and help us achieve our longevity goals. So, even if longevity does not run in your family, let's explore other ways to extend the time we have on the planet. Today's guest is Dr. Stephen Sideroff. Dr. Sideroff is an internationally recognized psychologist, executive, and medical consultant, and expert in resilience, optimal performance, addiction, neurofeedback, and leadership, and has published pioneering research in these fields. He is a professor at UCLA in the Department of Psychiatry and Biobehavioral Sciences and the Department of Rheumatology, as well as director of the Wallenberg Institute of Ethics. He was the founder and former clinical director of the Stress Strategies Program of UCLA Santa Monica Hospital and former clinical director of MoonView Treatment and Optimal Performance Center. Dr. Sideroff is the author of The Path, which is a comprehensive program for mastering stress and achieving optimal health and performance that distills your journey to resilience down to one question. And that question is, at this moment, am I on the path or off the path? And if you are off the path, it helps you get back on it. His book is designed to lead you step by step on a path towards success and help you heal from emotional wounds and the ravages of stress. So, with that, Doc, I welcome you to the Protecting Your Nest podcast.
Thank you for that lovely introduction, Tony, and it's a pleasure to be here with you.
Absolutely. And it's the funniest thing. I'm looking at your beautiful background with the piano. And I had a nurse of mine, shout out to Denise, who worked with me at Advocate Aurora at my Beverly side. And she said, you need to step up your game with your background. And you can see mine's very simple. It matches my scrubs, but you have inspired me to step up my game. So I can't promise Denise that I'll have a piano in the background, but I will try to eventually step it up. So it'll be on my to-do list. And again, I thank you for being here. I admire your work. I admire what you're doing. And just so thankful that your book, The Path, is available to help make us, help us think outside the box a little bit and how we can improve our journey towards resilience. But as we get started, let's just take a moment for those who don't know who you are, for you to introduce yourself to my audience. And I like talking a little bit about, where you're from, where you grew up, and a little bit about your family dynamics. Maybe we'll start with that.
Sure. So, I grew up in the Bronx in New York, although I quickly left there when I was 16 to go to college and actually never went back. I moved to Florida, then to California, where I did a postdoctoral fellowship at University of California at Irvine. Then I took a position as assistant professor at McGill University in Montreal. And when I was there, I had this great good fortune of getting to know some of the pioneers in neuroscience. And that was a wonderful experience, but I couldn't handle the cold weather and came back to beautiful California at UCLA. And while I started my career in brain research, I moved into clinical work when I came back to California. I wanted to work with people, not animals. I wanted to be able to have the subjects that I was working with, I was able to ask them questions and they were able to give me responses, not like animals. So that's why, I wanted to find ways of helping people with the struggles in their lives. And I've had basically a couple of different pathways in doing that. I've done a lot of work and research in the area of dependency, substance abuse, developed some programs that have been instrumental in helping treatment programs, incorporating, for example, neurofeedback, a form of biofeedback, into treatment programs for addiction, but also realizing how we are all dealing with and struggling with the issue of stress in our lives, and wanted to work in that area because I realized that stress is a modulator of everything else that's going on in our lives. If we are having some difficulties and then we add stress to our lives, it begins to strain our ability to cope, and a
Mhm.
breakdown usually occurs. So the more we're capable of dealing with stress in our lives, the more we are able to rely on our coping abilities, the more we are able to develop greater capacities. And that's when I sort of shifted from stress management, because stress is, number one, is not only bad, there are good stresses. And number two, we're not going to get away from the stresses in our lives. And in fact, we experience growing levels and amounts of stress. So it's more about how well we manage, how well we cope with the stresses in our lives. And that's when I began developing models and methods of working with resilience. And my model of resilience is really a model of optimal functioning. And so that's where I've spent most of my last half of my career, is finding better and better ways of helping people become more and more resilient.
Perfect. I first of all shout out to all the people who still live in cold places like Chicago. I know you're fortunate to not be doing that. And then also, when I think about your transition from animal research to people, I had the same aha moment when I was in high school and I was in an architectural track, and I realized that drafting board was not going to allow me to connect with people. So I decided I need to do something else. And then medicine was on my top 3 list, and I chose to be a doctor. But I do agree that the stressors are good and bad. And I think for me personally, some of my biggest accomplishments have been revealed after I had a little bit of a stressor. And it could be something as simple as I'm in a master's, for nutrition and functional medicine right now. It's a little painful to be a busy doctor, a leader, a podcaster, a YouTuber, and to find time to get a master's. But man, you go through a little stress, you get through it, and man, it feels so good once you've kind of achieved those goals, and you're a better person for it. Your knowledge base is better, so all of that makes a lot of sense. So it's nice that you found this place that you're in now. So I love that. Now, in terms of longevity, I've always been a huge fan, and it's actually shocking that we all wouldn't be big fans of longevity, because as I said in my intro, it's nice to be able to have more time to achieve your life purpose or to just be with family. So this focus on longevity for you, why don't you talk a little bit more about why and what that's meant to you?
Yes. Well, longevity fits completely in with the notion of optimal functioning and optimal ability to adapt. Earlier in your introduction, you mentioned about being working outside the box, thinking outside the box. When we grow up, we are put into a box,
Hmm.
and we're put into a
Hmm.
box based on the environment in which we develop. So we learn, and we learn really, really well, but we learn to adapt to that environment, our childhood environment. And then we grow up, but we try to use as adults the same lessons, the same coping abilities that we had developed and learned as a child. So, another way of saying that is that we have adapted to our childhood environment, but then our adaptation gets stuck in the lessons of our childhood. And so a lot of my work in the work in really becoming more optimal functioning is about breaking out of that box and beginning to determine anew and fresh what are the good lessons of life that are not based on lessons learned in childhood, because in childhood we had to adapt to our primary caregivers. We were dependent on them, and those were not necessarily the best lessons as we move out into the world. So uh, optimal functioning is a key ingredient here. And so what I've learned is that optimal functioning leads to longevity from a psychological, emotional, mental, spiritual perspective. This is aside from the metabolic, which is just as important. But optimal functioning within those parameters leads to longevity.
And they work hand in hand, and I'm glad you pointed out that both are important. And again, my acronym Nest and Rope is to try to address various areas. There's no acronym that'll address every single thing, but I just tried to the best of my knowledge to address those. And I think about a patient that I talked to literally on my way home before our interview, and she was so frustrated and but yet optimistic because she found a clinician who would allow her to think outside the box and who himself thinks outside the box. If I had stayed in that box, I would have continued to follow recommendations that weren't really serving my patients. Rather, it was a dietary guideline or some other recommendation like the ones that organizations give. Although we're changing. I announced recently that the American Heart Association is changing how they look at certain diets, like low carb, for example, is saying it may be okay. And then I think about the life experiences I've had, and maybe even the same patient that may have said to her, or what I believe said to me, that we can't step outside of our box. And I just want to live in a world where we're always questioning our belief systems, and we're willing to be unafraid to learn from others who have a different perspective. And that's why my last podcast episode, even though I'm a low carb guy, we talked about sexual health, but he talked about, hey, I'm plant based, and I'll have another plant based and another plant based and another plant based, because we all have to have these intellectual conversations and not be afraid that we have different approaches. So all of that resonates with me, and it makes me even more interested in understanding your work about resilience, so I can be strong and be able to bounce back. So let's talk a little bit about that work. And when I looked up resilience, I came up with a couple of definitions. And the first was, resilience is the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties or toughness. And the second one said it's the ability of a substance or object to spring back into shape or have elasticity, right? So some of those definitions sound fairly obvious, but I just want to hear from you. How do you interpret what resilience is, and why should we care so much about having the strong resilience gene? Talk a little bit about that.
Sure, sure. So those are, while they are good definitions, they are very narrow in their perspective, in their scope, because you can bounce back and you could do well at bouncing back. But if you haven't healed your emotional wounds, then more stimuli in your life, in your environment, are going to trigger your reaction, going to trigger your stress. So you want to, we have a certain amount of personal energy, I like to say, and we could use it to deal with dangers, to bounce back from stress, or we can use that energy for the healing and maintenance of your body. Your
Mm,
body is always making choices between where it sends its energy. And the more we are in the defensive, protective mode in life, meaning we're expecting something bad to happen. And that's a mindset that a lot of people have. But when you have that mental approach, your body is always gearing up for fight or flight. And when you're doing that, you're not giving your body the opportunity to shift into the healing and maintenance mode. So, the
mm.
broader definition of resilience is overall optimal functioning. And that incorporates knowing when to get built up about an issue and knowing when, hey, this, no, it's a small thing. I don't need to use my personal energy to get riled up about that. It also means that when you do have an emotional reaction to whatever it is, having the intention to, as quickly as possible, work through the emotional issue and let it go so you're not carrying that excess baggage with you. Now, research has demonstrated, Tony, that there's a direct correlation. Intuitively we know that stress can speed up the aging process. Okay, getting back to longevity. But we now have scientific proof that that's the case. Um, Telomeres, which you may have talked about in other podcasts, telomeres are the sort of like the caps at the end of our chromosomes that when the cells divide, they protect our DNA. But every time cells divide, those endings, those telomeres fray a little bit, unravel a little bit. And the aging process is the continually unraveling of those ends of our chromosomes until at the point at which the cell can no longer divide. Research has shown that stress speeds up the shortening of the telomeres. A direct, a direct proof of the relationship between stress and speeding up of aging. So, stress and resilience is so important with regard to longevity.
I want my telomeres to be long, so I really am happy that you
Long live
put
our
that out.
telomeres.
That's right. Let's get these telomeres. That's right. And it's so nice that it can be measured. And I agree that I definitely have touched on that in the past. And it's just important that we learn these nuances, and hopefully more research will come to pass that will allow us to see what can we do. You just mentioned stress. What else can we do? Maybe more sleep will help. Whatever those things are, we need to know what they are, and it'll be a rubber stamp on I'm doing the right thing. I need to do more of this because again, I want to try to be here as long as possible for my family, friends, and again to live our life purpose. So thank you for bringing that term up, and I want to bring up another phrase that I heard you speak about in the past, which was autonomic dysregulation syndrome. So I don't, my audience is all over the place. I probably have a clinician listening. I also have, a patient who's, 70-year-old who is that follows me, or and everybody has different levels of education, but I think it's important that we speak to everybody. So as you think about that phrase, talk about what it is and just keep it act like I'm a fifth grader. So, so my patients and I can interpret it well.
Of course, yes. And it isn't that, actually, it is not that complicated. But when we're stressed, we activate one of the two branches of our nervous system, the sympathetic branch of our nervous system. This is the one that prepares us to deal with the stress, deal with danger, our fight or flight response. we have a second component of our nervous system, the parasympathetic. That's the recovery branch. So you activate for a stress, and then you allow the parasympathetic to take over so that you recover, so that you restore all the resources used up in the stress. When you do that, your body's in balance. That's optimal. That's resilience. That's optimal functioning. Okay? Now, take a look at all of our lives, the audience, you, me, all of our lives. If you think about our day, you'll realize that we encounter one stress after another. And some of them are real, and some of them of our own doing, of our interpretation of situations that may make them feel more dangerous than they actually are. But in any event, we encounter stresses all day. But think of, Tony, in your life, how many times during your day do you encounter a stimuli that says, go relax, that says, go recover, that says, turn on your parasympathetic branch of your nervous system?
Never.
Right, right, right. So automatically, throughout the day, we're activating and we're not recovering. We're activating and not recovering. That is imbalance. And autonomic dysregulation syndrome is a word used to describe chronic imbalance. What happens
Hmm.
with chronic imbalance? And now, the imbalance doesn't only cause emotional, mental, spiritual consequences, it has a direct impact on our physical way of our physical body. There's estimates of between 70 and 80% of visits to the doctor are the result of what I'm just talking about. So you can go to a rheumatologist, you can go to a cardiologist, you can go to a neurologist with different symptoms, but if you go backward, they all, I will suggest that all, if not totally, at least to a great degree, caused by this dysregulation, this imbalance, because it has physiological, biochemical consequences, including inflammation, including impact on immune system functioning, impact on blood pressure, impact on all the physiological markers that we typically look at. Okay, so that's what uh, dysregulation, autonomic dysregulation is. It's the consequence of this imbalance that we experience day in, day out, which tells us exactly the things that we need to do to restore balance, which is to literally practice some form of relaxation, which begins to reverse that. Begin to look at what triggers our stress response and address those that we can do something about. So there are different ways we can address that to restore balance to our nervous system.
I I am thinking about all the people watching or listening to this episode, and they're probably thinking about how unbalanced they are. Even as you were speaking, I thought about how my day was going, particularly yesterday before we recorded, and I had emails coming in that were asking me to do things. I had my lovely manager who was asking me to do things. I had my wonderful medical assistant who was asking me to do things. I had medical colleagues, because I'm a medical director, who were asking me to do things. And I remember I'm really a family doctor who has been converted to an internist, so I see mostly adults now. In my days as a doctor who delivered babies and took care of the kids I delivered, I would be at the hospital delivering a baby and the clinic was upset. I would be at the clinic and I would get called from the hospital and have to leave the clinic. The clinic is upset. I would be at Red Lobster with my lovely wife and my kids. We'd have to take 2 cars there because I have to go in to deliver a baby. And that's not including all the other responsibilities. So you're constantly not balanced because at the time, didn't know how to meditate, didn't know how to pause. And I'm still working on that. I think we all are.
Mhm.
I still get, people still come. Patient today in clinic said, how do you do all this stuff? And the answer is you keep practicing and pausing and hopefully having people to help you provide perspective so you can do it all. And but that balance is not there for most of us. I think I'm glad I brought up this what sounded like an impossible term to understand, so that my audience would keep that term in mind and reflect and pause and say, am I balanced? And if not, how do I become more balanced? How do I learn how to meditate? How do I learn how to carve out time to pause? And I think that's going to be good for all of us. So thank you for that. And I do want to talk a little bit about one of the things that has impacted my family personally,
Let
and
me
that's
let me
oh,
Tony, before you go ahead, let me just comment on
yeah,
what you said,
absolutely.
because one of the consequences of exactly what you're talking about is people feel either like this is too much, I can't do it, and they give up, or they try to do it, but they feel overwhelmed. As soon as they're starting to do one thing, they realize, well, there's this, and there's this, and there's everything else. And it causes people to just kind of give up or get frustrated about the process or to feel inadequate in themselves. So, number one, it's important to come from a place of self compassion here, and acceptance. Yeah,
Mm,
this is tough, and everybody has it tough. Secondly, it's about making a commitment, taking responsibility, getting into a place of balance. No one else is going to do it for me. I have to do it. It's owning that responsibility. And then number three, and this is where in my book the notion of the path comes in, because the instrument of the path was designed to help people who feel overwhelmed. So the idea of the path is there are many things that one needs to do to become more resilient. And so if I say, okay, this is something I need to do, and I'm engaged in that, that puts me on the path. If I'm on the
okay.
path, I can't do any better than I'm doing. So when I look to something else that needs to be done, I can say to myself, I'm already on the path. I don't have to think about that right now. It helps prioritize. It helps being okay when you're doing something that's helpful to yourself, even though you have to put other things on the shelf momentarily. It's a way to work without getting distracted by, oh, what about this and what about that? We need that kind of notion of the path to know we're doing what we can be doing. We're doing something that's helping us, even though we're not doing it all at the same time.
I have a leadership coach, and he introduced me to the Eisenhower matrix. And I like the Eisenhower matrix because it tells you there's 4 boxes, right? But the ones that's the most important is the urgent and important box. And the ones that's the least important is the not urgent and not important box. So what that does is it allows you to at least, let's take these 10 to-dos, and there's probably 2 or 3 that matter. Let's do those early, and I think that also helps. But I agree. So we have these tools to help frame things, but again, I think just having awareness is really the key. And I think this conversation is about helping people to have awareness. So totally agree with that. And the question was, again, this idea that dementia has impacted my family. And a lot of people who are aging, sometimes my patients will say, I don't want to get old. And I think that's partly because they don't want to get old and not be able to do the things they once did. And certainly they don't want to get old and not have a mind that's working properly. So dementia and conditions that affect cognitive functioning is very much things that people worry about. So, because nobody wants to lose their brain functioning. So as it relates to the relationship between stress and cognitive functioning, could you speak about that impact?
Yes, yes. And Tony, it reinforces that all roads lead to stress and resilience because, again, research has demonstrated that stress directly impairs certain areas of the brain, such as the hippocampus. The hippocampus is a very important area in the brain because, number one, it's the major area where new brain cells are born, are developed to replace other nerve cells.
Mm,
Um, it's We have this irony where one of the functions of the hippocampus is that when stress occurs, one of the actions of the hippocampus is to dampen the stress response.
mm,
So that's adaptive, that's helpful, it's great. You have a healthy hippocampus, it's going to facilitate dampening our stress response. When stress impairs the functioning of the hippocampus, which impairs its ability to dampen the very stress response that's causing it to be impaired. So there's this feedback loop that actually shows us how much managing dealing with stress is important. So stress impairs the functioning of the brain in many different ways. Um, we have evidence of it just shrinking certain areas of the brain. People who have fibromyalgia, um, they have a smaller hippocampus. Okay.
mm,
So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, when we're stressed, when we feel we're in danger, so I was talking about the chronic impact of stress. Now let me talk about the acute impact of stress.
mhm,
Okay. So if we feel like there's danger, one of the things that our brain wants to do is it wants to shift to the lower centers, more primitive centers of the brain that have to do with survival. So when we're feeling danger, when we start to get worried and concerned of a threat, danger, we lose some of our ability to access the most advanced levels, the top level, the cortex and prefrontal cortex of our brain. Thus, we don't make as good decisions. Thus, we don't
mhm,
problem solve as well. So, you have both the acute and chronic implications of stress.
mm. Um, I love being a podcaster because I'm, although this is not my nutrition and functional medicine instructor in front of me, you're being my nutrition and functional medicine instructor right now. And I think this is a gift because, first of all, hippocampus, new brain cells are born here. I didn't know that. That was a new one to me. So I just think that as we are exploring these concepts and opening up our minds and understanding how the brain works, we will be more incentivized to take better care of that brain and to feed that brain what it needs. And so again, I'm really thankful that you took the time. It's really your life's work to put something on paper to help guide us and lead us. And that's why I want to move towards the path. I want to talk a little bit about the path. I love the title, by the way, because I think we're all on a journey. And I will share with anybody that I'm not as concerned with reaching the target as much as the journey. I had to train my brain. I just want to take the right journey, be on the right path, try to pause long enough to enjoy the journey, but I want to be going somewhere. And I just don't want to be flailing around, not knowing where I'm going. So let's talk a little bit about the path. I know you have 9 pillars that you describe. So let's put some meat on the bones for the
Okay.
people who are checking, who took the time to spend time with us today. Let's give them some information about
Okay.
that.
Of course. Of course. So, yeah, my model of resilience, I think, is a very comprehensive model that addresses everything that has to do with optimal functioning. Okay. So the first 3 of the 9 areas have to do with relationship. The first one, and in many respects the most important, Tony, is your relationship with the one person who you're with 24/7, 24 hours a
Mm,
day, yourself.
mm,
Okay?
mm,
You need a healthy, positive relationship with yourself. Too many of the people that I work with, that I see, that I talk to are self critical, self judgmental, um, undermine themselves in various negative ways. So the first pillar is having a loving, caring, accepting, positive relationship with yourself. The second one is your relationship with others. And this is about the if there are relationships you can be in that are stressful, and there are relationships you can be in that are nurturing and nourishing and emotionally nourishing. You want to maximize the latter and minimize the former.
mm,
And you want to be able to distinguish the two. You
mm,
want to be able to notice when you're in a relationship that's not serving you, that's not nurturing you, because
mm,
either the other person is competitive with you, the other person finds fault with you,
mm-hmm.
etc. Okay,
You're hurting somebody right now, Doc. You're somebody's really gonna hear that and it's gonna touch them. So,
right,
but keep going.
right. So with the second pillar, relationship with others, you want to be able to set healthy boundaries with other people
Mm-hmm.
so that they don't, so even the ones that are negative or toxic, so you don't let that negative energy reach you. So you're able to say no to people when that's
Mm,
appropriate. Okay.
mm,
And so you and you maximize the relationships that are nurturing and nourishing, and you're able to let your guard down with loving people so that you're able to receive that nurturing, that nourishing.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That contributes to resilience. The third pillar is your relationship with something greater. This has to do with your spirituality. It has to do with having a purpose in your life, a meaning to your life. This is about giving service. This is the way that you engage with the larger community. When you do that, it supports you. When you do that, daily hassles are less noticeable.
Mm-hmm.
The next 3 areas have to do with organismic balance and mastery. There's physical, mental, and emotional. So, physical is really at the heart of what people talk about when they talk about stress management. That's the ability to recover after a stressful event, the balance I talked about earlier. It's the ability to go to a deep place of calm. It's the ability to get a good night's sleep. Its ability to manage and have control over your physiology.
Mm,
And that takes attention. Okay. The fifth pillar is mental balance and mastery. And this is cognitive. This is starting out with a positive perspective.
mm,
This is about letting go of negative thoughts as quickly as you're able to let go of them. If they require dealing with, you deal with them, but then you let go. You don't allow them to go around and around in your head to continually impact your physiology. Okay. Then there's emotional balance and mastery. And this is about being tuned into your feelings and not defending against them, distracting yourself from them. And this requires some work because most of us grow up defending against our feelings and being unconscious to them. Okay? And then they don't go away by themselves. They just sit inside and then they affect us, but they affect us unconsciously. So some people are emotional reactors. Something happens and they have a big reaction because the current situation is tapping into an old pool of feelings from other situations. This is why you want to work through and resolve emotional issues as they come up. Otherwise, they build up inside of you. The last three have to do with how we engage in the world. So the seventh pillar is presence. And now most people think of presence, okay, I'm present, I'm here, I'm aware, I notice. Presence has two directions to it. One is what we receive. Okay, um, you know, I once saw a patient in my office who came in following an automobile accident, and she was injured in an automobile accident, and I was going to do some biofeedback with her to help her recover balance in her body. And as she was telling me her history, she told me that she's been in 6 accidents in the last 2 years. And the kicker was she then said, and none of them were my fault.
Mm.
How do you be in 6 accidents in 2 years and none of them are your fault? Right? When she left my office, I noticed that she walked into a desk that I had in my office.
Mm.
She was not present. She was not
Mm-hmm.
aware to notice something right in front of her to avoid. And it told me that she's so preoccupied with her concerns and worries that she has difficulty being present. And so, in those accidents where she probably could have avoided them, she didn't
Mm-hmm.
because she wasn't present.
That's
And
right.
so, it's also an example of how not being present can affect us. It
Mm-hmm.
leads to mistakes. It leads to a lot of different things. So, presence of what we see and take in, but then also our presence, what we project out into the world. What what message am I projecting when I walk into a room with people? Do I look like nervous, scared?
Mm-hmm.
Do I look judgmental, critical, or do I look open and receptive? We don't think about these things. We don't notice these things, but they have an impact. It all has an impact. The eighth is flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
Flexibility has many dimensions to it. It's being able to change your goals when the original goal there when there are roadblocks to the original goal. So the last
Mm-hmm.
2 years we've needed to be very flexible because of all the limitations of the environment. But someone who's resilient is able to be flexible, change goals, change strategies, and even change perspective in order to have greater success. And finally, the ninth pillar is power, that I define as the ability to get things done.
Mm.
And there we're talking about
Mm.
courage, persistence, being willing to be uncomfortable, patience. It involves a lot of different qualities that go into getting things done. The more you engage and get things done, the more trust you have in yourself, and the fewer things are experienced as stressful. And that's also resilience.
It was brilliant of you to have the ninth pillar. So often we have great ideas. So often we learn great lessons. And so often we don't do anything with it. And I think that having that last pillar is so critical
Mm-hmm.
so that people can have some actionable things that they, first of all, make sure they can do it, but to actually remind them that you got to take this information and do something with it. I just think that's so important.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah, and it
so let me
integrates
say, yeah,
a few of the pillars
absolutely.
because you have to accept that other people may judge you and let
Hmm.
that be okay and do it anyway. You have to have you have to be able to be accepting of yourself. So if you make a mistake, if it doesn't go the way you want, you can forgive yourself. You could be okay with it
Hmm.
instead of beating yourself up.
Let's speak to action really briefly. I get your book in front of me. I now know what these pillars are. So, what can a person expect to receive from your book? Obviously, they're going to get more insights into what you just described. But in terms of being able to take that information and do something with it, what can an average person listening right now, when they put that book in front of them, what's going to be your purpose, and what can they do with that information? Just give me an idea of what
Okay,
to expect.
sure. So a couple of pieces of feedback that I've gotten from people who've read my book. One person said, I've read dozens of self help books. This is the first one that I felt really speaks to me and gave me a path, like the
Right.
path, to do it step by step and not feel overwhelmed. And from a number of people said that they were surprised at how the book what I was talking when I was talking in the book, it felt like I was talking directly to them, understanding where they're coming from. And that's how I designed the book. I took into account I've been doing this work for over 40 years now. And so when I did the book, I realized I'm not sitting next to the person reading it as they're reading it for them to ask me for clarity or to answer a question. So the book anticipates a wide range of different reactions and responses from people and addresses them proactively. So people reading my book feel like it's really helping them go step by step through a process. It's very clear so they know what they need to do. It also addresses people's resistance, reasons
Hmm.
why they have difficulty doing it, and helps them overcome that resistance to get them on board, to get them on the path. It also deals with how people tend to fall off the path. That's
Hmm.
normal. So I normalize behavior that people will might result in giving up because they fell off the path.
Hmm.
No, it's normal. Here's how you get back onto the path. So it really is almost like having a therapist or a guide or a coach with you all the time. That's how people find the book. It's very um, supportive in that regard.
we we what I found is when I have clear expectations, when I have a process, rather, at clinic, for example, if I have a way to approach a conversation or just a way to be successful, um, I think that reduces stress because at least I know there's a kind of a formula, a recipe. I'm not out here on my own guessing. So I think creating a resource like the path that does that is very valuable because people need to walk away with the ability to know what do I do, as opposed to saying that was interesting and profound. We want them to actually be able to act on it. So thanks for making it that way. You shared with me an article that you wrote in Psychology Today, and it spoke to having resilience during difficult times. Uh, so we're in the middle of a pandemic. It's obviously quieter, although we're worried about what's going on in China right now in terms of a resurgence of variants, right? So talk a little bit about two things. One is, you know, how being resilient is going to be beneficial during this time, and maybe go back a little bit and talk a little bit about how childhood traumas can impact us and make it difficult to deal with stress currently. So just talk a little bit about those
Yes,
concepts.
definitely, Tony. I want to take a step back and mention one other thing about the book that helps people. I have the text, and then in the margins, I have actual steps, detailed steps that people can take. So in the text, I will now say, okay, go to step one and do step one, so that
Mm-hmm.
it's really giving people a step by step approach.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So even though things are more difficult now, it doesn't change the basic equation, which is that we are all each responsible for ourselves.
Yeah.
So that's where I begin, and therefore, the first step for a person is to take that responsibility,
Yeah.
not to give up or not to do it reluctantly, but to embrace taking responsibility to be resilient. Embrace it. That's an important distinction because too many people come to the process because of, say, physical symptoms, emotional symptoms, and they sort of feel resentful that they have to address it, or at least are coming to it with some resistance. Whatever resistance you have in the process is going to only get in your way. The more you embrace the process, the more successful you're going to be. So that's an important first step. Embrace the process, make the decision. You want to be resilient, that you want all the benefits of being resilient, that it's going to enhance your life on many levels, and you embrace it. So that's number one. Uh, I've given talks on how parents can develop resilient children. And it's true that we grow up under an array of varying degrees of stress, trauma, um, events that have negatively impacted us. And first of all, we all have to have compassion toward ourselves for whatever difficulties, traumas, abuse we've gone through. The next part of compassion, in fact, the compassion is sort of like the first step in loving yourself. Loving yourself is the next most, after the decision, loving yourself is the next most important. Okay. When you love yourself, you want good things for yourself. When you love yourself, you're more able to take in good things that happen to you. Um, and then it's about the process of being aware of how the lessons of childhood are getting in your way now.
Mm.
How, for example, if you grew up in an environment that was dangerous because you had a parent that was unpredictable, you had a parent that was addicted, um, you had parents who didn't know where they were going to pay their next bill, and so they passed on their anxiety to you. That results in you having this perspective in which you're always looking for danger. Okay. So it's about addressing this is one example. It's about addressing that. And one of the things I do in my programs is tell people they need to begin reversing that process by identifying places and mental states in which they are safe. They can tell themselves,
Mm.
I'm safe. So hopefully, when you get into bed at night, you're able to begin your bedtime routine literally by telling yourself, I am safe. I can let down my guard. I can go into a deeper sleep to get better recovery because I'm safe. So this is a big thing. You begin to identify if you're sitting down for a meal, again, to be able to say, while I'm eating right now for the next half hour, I'm safe. I can
Mm-hmm.
eat without worrying about any danger so that one of the other things we talked about with the autonomic balance is that when you're in the stress mode, when you're in the threat mode, your digestive system tends to shut down. Well, how do you eat and digest if you're shutting down the digestive system? And this, too, is the source of many GI type problems. Again, autonomic dysregulation syndrome, because we're not allowing the digestive system to go through its normal optimal process. Okay. So again, it's a step-by-step approach based on my 9 pillars of learning to treat yourself better, because you could have been in an environment growing up in which you learned to treat yourself abusively. And we
Mm.
take on some of the patterns of our parents. So that needs to be addressed. And we can go down the list through my 9 pillars of step by step how we can begin to recover and be more resilient. With regard to what we're
Mm.
dealing with in life today, one of the techniques I tell people is no matter what's going on in your life, there's always a best way to deal with it.
Mm.
Always. There's not
Always.
there isn't a perfect way. There isn't
Mm-mm.
necessarily a way that takes care of all your problems, but there's always a best way. So as
Mm.
soon as you own that, believe that, it automatically redirects your thinking away from the problem and what's wrong to how do I find the best way?
Mm. You know, there's so much. I make these little sounds because it touches me. It just so let me tell you what I mean. So I'm thinking about, first of all the people on the planet who don't ever hear your voice or my voice, and they don't get a chance to grow as human beings.
Mm-hmm.
That breaks my heart. And so thankfully, we have a platform to teach, share, learn together. I think about all the people who, because they didn't learn, have had childhood trauma or life experiences which negatively impact their current relationships. Um, and they don't have a way to deal with things when they occur. And I'm so much richer in knowledge. And nobody has a perfect marriage. Nobody's a perfect parent. Nobody's a perfect leader, clinician, any of those things, because we're on a path towards being better.
Right.
But man, just imagine if we had more awareness of the resources. And one of the things I want to touch on, because I know we have something in common, we have respect for Dr. Gottman, right?
I'm
We have
sorry for
respect
what?
for,
Respect.
or Dr. Gottman, the
Yes, yes.
yeah. So Dr. Gottman, for those who are listening, it wrote the 7 Principles of Marriage. He may have other books, but that's the one that resonates with me. And he did research. So the reason why I want to talk about that is because let's give an example. So one of the things I learned from him is he talked about, harsh startups, right? And he said that if you have a harsh startup, meaning that you're having a conversation with your significant other, and because of your life experiences, right, your childhood experience, you don't know how to really have these conversations. And maybe your only response is to push back, to argue, to yell, to be abusive. But he says that, and the statistic still blows my mind, you have a 8% chance if you start with a hard startup of being successful in that conversation. So if 100 conversations occur, only 8 will be successful because harsh startups usually end harshly.
Not
That's a
very good
very
odds.
value. Oh my, not good at all. And I like my odds to be in my favor. So with that knowledge and with some techniques that the Gottman Institute has instituted, maybe you'll know how to start a conversation in a way that's a little less harsh, and maybe you have a better chance. So I want you to talk a little bit about lessons learned from John Gottman and the things that he talks about?
Okay. Well, I do quote him in my book, and in particular, I was struck by his research that showed that good relationships have a 20-to-1 ratio of positive to negative encounters.
Oh Lord, that's a lot.
And that when that ratio drops to, say, 5-to-1, it's an indication that the relationship is in trouble. Okay. So I use that both in my pillar number 1 and pillar number 2. So in pillar number 1, I'm asking people to pay attention to their comments to themselves.
Mm.
And do they treat themselves with that 20-to-1 ratio, saying 20 positive things to themselves versus one negative? Or is it closer to the 5-to-1? Or in some people, they do more negative than positive. So it's an awareness tool. And we can do this in relationships as well. But when we engage with somebody, the real key is to start off connecting, to start off
Mm-hmm.
getting on the same page, to start off meeting the other person where they are, so that you establish a sense of relationship and closeness. Then you can give feedback of something that's bothering you that you don't like. The other person is going to be less defensive, more open to hearing it if they first feel like you're on their side.
Mm-hmm. So that makes a lot of sense, and again, a lot of respect for one of the reasons why I respect the work Dr. Gottman has done is because it's research, and for an evidence-based doctor, if I have a level of research that was done, I think it makes it more likely to be legitimate and you can trust it more. And it's not just an opinion piece, it's really, really putting human beings in the lab, which is an amazing concept. So I really appreciate that. One more concept I want to throw out there for you to explain is evolutionary mismatch. So if you could just talk a little bit about what that means, and so our listeners can learn from that principle as
Yes,
well.
of course. So it gets back to the notion of autonomic dysregulation syndrome and the reasons why we are so susceptible to it. So we've already discussed how we have many stressful stimuli in our day and almost none that uh, cause us to be go into a place of calm and relax. But to begin with, we have the same stress response, fight or flight response that our hunter gatherer ancestors had 10, 50, 100,000 years ago. So even though our society has moved significantly from that type of environment, we've kept that same. Our physiological response to stress and danger hasn't changed yet. It may
Mm-hmm.
never it may never change for other reasons. And therefore, anything that causes us uncertainty, danger, stress, dislike, conflict is going to activate the only one stress response we have, which mobilizes our bodies to either fight the danger or to run from the danger. How
Mm-hmm.
many of the stimuli or how many of the stresses you encounter can you effectively deal with by either fighting them or running from them? So our bodies mobilize, and then there's no release of that energy, and that compounds the imbalance. So we have to deal with the evolutionary imbalance as well as all the other factors that I've been talking about. And this is one of the reasons why exercise is so important, because it gives the built up energy, tension in the body, and access a release.
Mm-hmm. Nice. So thank you for that. I just felt that concept was so important. We talk a lot about evolutionary concepts when it comes to diet, but we also want to broaden that and expand. So I really appreciate that. So let's talk about how we're going to keep the doctor in front of me healthy. And so when you think about the nest in a row and all of those principles, nutrition, exercise, less stress, more sleep, my previous guest, Brooke Hazen, talked about sexual health. So I was like, should I have another S for sexual health? But that's another subject for another day. The T is about how we think. We talked about that today. Recovering from trauma. We talked about that. The rope is relationships. We talked about that. I felt like I did a good job considering our conversation today. Protecting ourselves from organisms and pollutants that can harm us. And then, of course, protecting our emotions and making sure our life experiences serve us. So that's the nest in the row. Where are you in terms of what you're going to focus on over the next 12 months? Where are your priorities in that spectrum of things?
Mhm. Mhm. Well, I think over the next 12 months, uh, I personally look to how I can improve along all those 9 dimensions of resilience. I'm I recognize the importance of each one and how they're all integrated with each other. So it's very important for me to set goals, um, and then to approach them as a leader would approach them, where I'm taking full responsibility. That's another key. And being willing to make a mistake. If anytime you engage in any kind of learning process, you're not going to be perfect and you're going to make mistakes. It's part of the process. So that was a lesson that was hard for me to learn, and I'm still learning it, to accept mistakes, that I'm not perfect, and that I can appreciate myself even if I'm not perfect. So it would be setting goals in terms of being able to offer more programs to people, being able to reach more people in my work. I'm particularly interested in leadership. I'm particularly interested in working with CEOs because they have a tremendous leverage and impact on many other people. So if I can
Mm.
help CEOs become more resilient, healthier, they are going to do their jobs more effectively and better. And all the people that come in contact with them will feel the positive impact of that. So these are my own visions. And it's important to have a vision. We're heading somewhere. It's good when you head in the direction that you want to be going in.
I love it. And please, please, please help the leaders. I agree. The butterfly fly effect of having leaders learn these principles will then hopefully lead to the people they lead learning these principles. So that is a great idea. So if that book is grabbable, I see it behind you. If you could grab it, put it close to the screen so people who are watching the video version they can see it. So thank you for doing that. And so they'll know what it looks like. And of course, let's share how our listeners can get your book. And of course, any other activities that you're doing out there. How can they connect with you?
Sure, sure. So we talked about autonomic dysregulation syndrome, the imbalance. So one thing that people need to do is practice a regular relaxation exercise. So if people go to my website, drstephensideroff.com, there is for the people listening to this program, there's a free audio download of a visualization relaxation exercise, 15 minutes in length, that really will support their autonomic balance. So that's one thing. If they go to my website, I also have a resilience challenge. And it's a series of questions that they take. and they can get immediately automatically scored and see where they're at in terms of their level of resilience with a little explanation as to that level and its implications. So, those are two things people can get by going to my website, drstephensideroff.com. My book is available at amazon.com. And now, if people would like my resilience assessment booklet, which goes into my model and also has a more extended questionnaire so that they can get literally a profile of their resilience along the 9 dimensions. If they email me and tell me that they heard me on your program, I will send them a free copy of my resilience assessment booklet. So my email is my last name, Sideroff, at ucla.edu. And I'd be happy to send that out to anybody who sends me an email asking for it.
Excellent. Those are Christmas gifts that we appreciate, and we as much appreciate you, Dr. Stephen Sideroff, for the work you're doing and just for providing some different ways of looking at resilience and stress and traumas and all the things we touched on. So definitely want to thank you for blessing us with you today. And I hope that somebody, and hopefully many somebodies, will walk away feeling, again, there's hope. There's some things I need to work on, and I'm going to be on a path. I don't have to do it all in one day. So thank you so much for being with me today.
You're very welcome, Tony. It's been a pleasure. You asked great questions, by the way.
Well, thank you. I
You're a good
guess
moderator.
the practice is helping. So thank you so
Cool.
much. Words of affirmation, I'll always be happy to receive. So for those who are watching or listening, I'm not sure how you feel about it, but yes, I do want to live longer, and it's not for selfish reasons. It's because we have life purposes, and for me, it's really spreading the message of how to heal from metabolic diseases like dementia, as we mentioned earlier, cancer, heart disease, stroke, and so many others. So yes, I do want to extend my life. I want to extend the length of my telomeres, and I want the same for you. So that's why I am so grateful that we have a resource now, our guest book, The Path, and its 9 pillars to help us along our way as we try to build up and improve our resilience, and that'll then lead to success and just the ability to face the many challenges that we will face in life. So as we conclude this episode, I hope this episode has filled some of the knowledge gaps that you may have had about the topic of longevity and resilience. And as we conclude, I only ask that you continue to be safe, be well, and continue to protect your nest.